Hello, today I'm going to talk about Jean-François Millet, some of his most recognized works and his influence in other artists. Let's start with who was he. Millet was a French painter who belonged to the artistic movement of realism, developed in the late 19th century. Through his works, François showed sympathy for the peasants, as he always preferred rural life over urban life. Millet was born the 4th of October of 1814 in a small town of Normandy. He belonged to the peasant family, so that was the reason why he painted about peasants and rural style. In his town, he learned Latin and then he moved to Cherbourg to study with Paul de Moschel, a portrait painter. From this moment, most of his life was based in moving from Cherbourg to Paris and vice versa. Later on, between 1837 and 1839, Millet continued his studies in the Academy of Fine Arts of Paris, where he improved his skills with Paul de la Roche as his teacher. When the artist finished his studies there, he returned to Cherbourg, where he started as a portrait painter. After 1840, Millet was influenced by Lumière, whose figures and contrast between light and shadow are seen in Millet's following works. His first recognition came in 1847, with Oedipus taken down from the tree, that had a mythological theme not very common between the artist's works. Millet also lived a period of his life in Le Havre, where he stayed with his second wife, Catherine Lamière, and painted some works before returning to Paris. A few years later, in 1870, him and his family escaped from the Franco-Prussian War to Cherbourg and finally returned to Barbizon when the war finished in 1871. At the end, he died a few days later after his wedding with Catherine in 1875. François is also known for being part of the Barbizon School with Théodore Rousseau, Charles Jacques, Narcisse Diaz, and Constant Truand. All of these artists established a friendship with Millet on his first travel to Paris in 1837, when he was studying there. This group is recognized due to its style, which represented the nature and rural areas thanks to paintings of different landscapes such as forests or plains. Many of the paintings of these artists show the forest of Fontainebleau, because the group met near it, so it was a source of inspiration for them. Millet was one of the most characteristic painters of the Barbizon school due to his tendency of painting rural landscapes and peasants, as there were revolutionary themes. All over his life, Millet painted a great amount of works, but not all of them were loved by the public. The Captivity of the Jews in Babylon was one of those, and after his painting was criticized, it disappeared, so many people thought that Millet had destroyed it. But in 1984, some scientists from the Fine Arts Museum of Boston discovered that beyond that work, Millet had painted another one known as the Young Fdez. Although there were other dislikes, he revolutionized arts with his new topics showing rural works and population. For example, his most recognized group of three works consists of The Sower, The Gleaners, and The Angelus. The Sower is considered his first masterpiece. Nowadays, it is found in the Fine Arts Museum of Boston, and with it, Millet starts showing the reality of peasants and not idealizing them as urban population was used to. The second one, The Gleaners, show a famous activity that continues to exist nowadays in France, which is based in collecting the grain left in the fields when the harvest finished. It was criticized at that moment, but now it's considered one of Millet's best paintings. The Angelus is the last of the trio. Here you can see a pair of peasants praying in the middle of a field. Thanks to X-rays analysis, it's known that at the beginning the peasants were praying for their baby's death, but later on, Millet changed the coffin for the basket that we can see nowadays. After this group of paintings, he continued painting more works for different patrons such as Émile Gabet, but his last most recognized work was Midnight Rest, where Millet painted two peasants sleeping, symbolizing the few minutes of break that had the peasants that worked since the sunrise. Now let's briefly talk about Millet's influence. As he was one of the main representatives of realism, he influenced other artists such as Van Gogh or Dalí, which both made versions of the main works of the French painter. For example, Van Gogh version Midnight Rest and The Silver, where the difference between styles is present. And Dalí made his own version of the Angelus, a part of writing and analysis of Millet's painting. For That's all. Hope you like this summary about Millet, a great realistic painter that showed the life of peasants and influenced other great artists.